Welcome to When Women Preach. This podcast exists to empower AAPI and Latina women faith leaders. My name is Diana Shing, and I'm here with Executive Director and co-founder of Isaac, Li Hertig. And our guest for today is Katharine Hsiao. Katharine is a retired attorney whose faith journey led her to spend her career advocating for low-income, immigrant, and isolated seniors, particularly seniors of color. She now serves as the volunteer leader of the Alliance of Asian American Baptist Churches, the organization that brings together Asian Americans of more than 35 Asian ethnic groups for fellowship and advocacy in the American Baptist Churches USA denomination. While an undergrad at Yale and ever thereafter, Katharine was deeply influenced by Li Hsu, her lifelong dear friend and sister in faith. So welcome, Katharine. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I just want to say what a joy it is. By accident on Facebook, I felt led to post, thinking that somebody may know Li Hsu. And there you were. And you were a very close friend and mentee. And you got involved in caretaking till her last phase. Who would have guessed? And, thanks to Ron Hsu, who sent donation in memory of Li Hsu, only then I started reading about her and was truly inspired. And we are here to highlight, even though she's in eternal home since 2021, we have many of her mentees who are continuing her legacy. I summarize after reading Yale Daily blog. Li Hsu embodies unconditional love, advocacy, and generosity. Her hospitality to everybody. And Katharine, you also summarized her life with your own outline and obituary as well, or eulogy. So take it away, Li Hsu and her impact.
Well, Li Hsu was 2 years ahead of me when I was an undergrad at Yale. And just before I got there, another fellow you might know, Cyril Nishimoto of Gardena Valley, had started an Asian American Bible study at Yale. And it had the most pivotal impact in my life. And Mary and another friend, Alberta, were the key leaders of it. They were 2 years older than I was. And when I came to Yale from Indiana, I had a very simplistic faith. I didn't have any identification at all with being Asian American. I felt very lost at this, East Coast school. And it was that Bible study that took me in and taught and nurtured me. And Li Hsu, most of all, who walked with me from that time on. Li had a very devout faith. Everything she did, and she did a lot, was all based on her faith in Jesus Christ. And during college, even before just I got there, many of the Asian Americans at Yale were very, very activist, right? There was a very small population of Asian Americans at this prestigious school, and were often overlooked, right? And so some of the other groups had cultural centers, but Asian Americans did not. And so she and other classmates of hers and some of my classmates too, as we got there, fought for having an Asian American cultural center. And we eventually got it. And she came back a few years later when it was built and remodeled and was the first dean at Yale of that Asian American Cultural Center. And through that, she brought together, I believe I was told today, it's now 59 different Asian American groups at Yale. But she worked to make sure, at that time, my time it was one, right? Asian American Students Association. And that was the group fighting for recognition on campus, for representation, for Asian American Studies courses, just to be recognized that Asian Americans even existed. And she played a major part in that, bringing about that cultural center. And not only that, getting diverse groups that were, started to be many groups. During her time, there were 30, I think. It's creating an infrastructure so that they would work together and recognize that you may see yourself Korean, Chinese, Japanese, dance group, Christian group, whatever, all kinds of groups now they're 59. You may see yourself as different and want to jockey for position, but the school sees you all the same, right? So if you don't work together, so she did that kind of thing. She had the ability to bridge build, inspire, and have a laser focus on individuals and bring out the best in them.
So as I read about her, I so wish I had met her in flesh.
Yes.
But here today, I have my favorite person, Katharine Hsiao. I have known her many, many years, and I still vividly remember at Peyton 202 or 3 Fuller's classroom in the 90s, and you were a beautiful, very memorable, sharp lawyer who was studying theology.
Yes.
So that was even after you were influenced by Mary Li Hsu, right?
Yes. So in college and after college, we all struggled with what do we do with our lives? We're Christians, we care. What do we do as Asian American women? And Alberta, who was still my mentor at the time, struggled between law school and social work school. She didn't even think of seminary at that time, right? Because she's from a conservative background. But she did go after school and work in a Chinatown, inner city, Chinatown, New York church. So she was a youth minister and really built up the youth there. And out of that, she went to social work school. And I and my other friend who were together were influenced by her, both went to law school. And we did that in order to try to bring about more justice, faith-based justice in the world for our people and for others. And so that journey that I had to become a public interest lawyer for the low-income elderly, especially elders of color, especially language access, people who are hindered by language access. English is not their first language. Those are the things I worked on in my career. And I really attribute that directly to my faith in God, of course, and the direction and inspiration I received from Mary.
So you summarize Mary in 4 different categories. Would you please take us to those amazing values she embodied?
Yes. After Mary passed away, just during COVID, we had a couple of services for her. And one of them that I spoke at, I spoke about 4 qualities that she had that I wanted to walk in her shoes, and I wanted others who may be inspired to walk in her shoes. And they were
have her shoes, right?
And I held her shoes. Her dear brother Ron gave me a lot of her shoes. I happen to wear the same size, so I often wear her shoes. And I wear purple, and I wear polka dots, and all of those are to remember her and her vivacity, and her love of life, and her passion to serve others. So the 4 qualities, though, that I did speak about were sacrifice. Okay, she came from a family that escaped communist China through North Korea and into Korea, and were brought over here by the Presbyterian churches. The missionaries in the Presbyterian churches brought her family over. Her brother, including her brother, she was born in Seattle, and they worked their way from nothing into having small businesses. Her brothers and sisters also all worked really hard in the family businesses. They are the ones who had a restaurant that brought Northern Chinese food to Seattle. They were the first. And so her quality of sacrifice for God, sacrifice for the family, what her parents did in order to bring the kids through those troubling times, was a huge legacy and a huge part of who she was. And she really meant it, and she lived it out. And by the way, her family helped found the Evangelical Chinese Church of Seattle. So all faith-based, all very, very focused on God. The second thing, which I have already mentioned, is justice. That Mary lived and breathed a gospel that was not only the good news and sharing Jesus with people who had never heard of him, but also justice. You would walk down the street with her in New York. She had this enormous purse, and she always had granola bars and water. And she would stop with every homeless person and say a word or two to them. She humanized them. She cared, and she wouldn't just hand them something. She would actually, treat them like people and walk with them. So her whole life was about starting with the Chinatown, career. And when she died, Not only did she leave some legacy to Isaac, but she looked out the window and said, Catherine, can you believe it? If I have any money, I'm going to give it to also help New York Chinatown. This is my heartbeat. Because she stayed in New York after she died, and she lived right near the edge of Chinatown. So justice was the second one. Micah 6:8, of course, was one of her favorite verses. What does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. She lived it out. And I mentioned what she did at Yale, right? She went back to Yale and then transformed Yale. And then she decided she wanted to serve first-generation students more. And so she switched to Brooklyn Community College because she felt that there were more first-generation students there who had a harder time, right? The ones at Yale were already going to be a little bit privileged once they got there. And that is why she did it. It's because she really felt that there are more students here who need me. She also exemplified unconditional love. Her life, she had a lot of ups and downs in her life. She went through a lot personally. And so she would adopt these daughters at her church and elsewhere who had also gone through a lot. One had lost a fiance to suicide. Some had lived through cancer. Others had lost their parents. She would minister out of her brokenness, out of her wounded heart, and just be there for them and totally adopt them and be there for them using the brokenness that she identified with Christ with to lift up others and to inspire them in their Christian walk as well. The fourth quality was joy. We were very deep soul sisters in Christ. In those last years after her very sudden, starting during COVID, very serious endocrine cancer, she was in pain a lot. And yet she in times she hit the depths of despair, but she never wavered in her faith in God and her joy in Jesus. She knew where she was going. And I don't think I could live through that much pain. I'm much more of a, give me the morphine. I'll take the morphine to dull the pain. But she was much more of a, no, I want to live how God wants me to live, and I'm going to go how God wants me to go. I'm not afraid of where I'm going. I will go when he calls me. And yet out of that pain, she took joy in the smallest things. She loved trees because she's from Seattle, right? So we went out once to a friend's home in the Hampton, and she just looked and smiled and giggled and said, the trees, that's God right there, staring at a forest of trees. This reminds me of home. We would just cry and laugh together in great joy because we knew what Jesus was doing for us, and that our earthly life can have a lot of pain. But yet Jesus is there for us, walking through us, working through us and walking with us through those deepest moments of sorrow. And that is what I learned from her most of all. Her walk, not things she said, but how she lived her life was really amazing. And I'm not surprised that she cared about, especially Asian American Christians, right? She wanted her people to know God and to learn about God. And women, of course, to learn, Asian American Christian women, everybody at Isaac and the Pastoral Lab, I just can't emphasize enough to you how proud she would be to be a part of this amazing work of God that you all are doing and creating with each step and with each breath that you take on this journey. So she's up there, I know, cheering on all women, and especially all women in ministry, and especially all Asian American women in ministry, and also, people of color in general. So also Latinx and Native American and Hispanic and certainly African American. She was a friend to all, and even in her work as an Asian dean at Yale, she was always working across color boundaries for justice. She started out, I think, even as an undergrad, representing all the people of color, right, on some of the Yale committees that were fighting against sexual harassment and racial harassment and those sorts of things. She was a fighter, and she spoke up.
Wow. You know what? As you're talking about tree metaphor, it seems like she was a gigantic tree, like in redwood. So there's such power of exemplar. And no wonder, Katharine, that you are impacting and constantly moving forward. because you had an amazing exemplar like Mary Li Hsu, you also went through a very inspiring but painful moment. You had your health issues. And what I remember is that, wow, she's navigating this path with courage and faith. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit of your own, you know, challenging moment and how you shore up your courage.
Certainly. Yes, in 2008 to 2009, I discovered I was in the middle of my career then, and I had 2 young children, and I discovered that I had not one but 2 cancers. I had breast cancer and thyroid cancer, just discovered during routine examinations. So, go get your examinations. And I was a shock. I was only in my late 40s, and I discovered that um, during the journey, the thing that sustained me was my faith in God and my family of God. And that was something I really learned at Yale too, right? That my Asian American Christian family at Yale, which became my closest family of my undergrad years, stood by me then as I journeyed through an identity journey, and my church and extended Christian family stood by me during my cancer journeys. And if there's anything I learned from that, it was that, your ground can be shaken, right? I was in the middle of multitasking everywhere. I was doing my, justice job with low-income seniors, and I worked for a national organization at that time, doing advocacy, working on Medicare and Medicaid. And I was raising kids, and I was being a spouse, and I was active in church. And I discovered that all of that was actually too much, that we women should not take on too much, that getting too stressed out is actually not godly. I thought it was. I thought multitasking was like, well, God made me to be, so I'm going to just do everything everywhere all at once, right? Everything everywhere all at once was my motto. That was my motto. But I discovered that actually I wasn't taking care of myself. And on that journey, I learned deeply that the thing I was not loving about that God did care about was me, including my health, my exercise, my diet, my level of stress, my intake of sugar. And so I needed that time. God slowed me down and said, time out, and really turned me around and made me have to give up. I eventually had to retire from my job early. Later, I found out that I had Lyme disease. So that was part of my intense fatigue and why I could not carry on my job. But through that journey of the cancer journey and the chemo and, all of that, and then later through the Lyme disease journey and my family's journey, I discovered that really relating to God the most deeply is when I can connect with other people in greatest pain. Because I went through that journey, because he gifted me that journey in a sense. It was a hard journey, but he gifted me that journey. He gave me people to walk through it with in faith. All kinds of people were praying for me. And so I now have that to give back to others. And so for Mary Lee, as she was going through her very difficult last year, for others, if I can be there for them in some deep way, talking about the journey and how God is with us even when we feel most distant from him or her, depending on how you want to look at God. Okay, him and her. God is with us and working with us. And sometimes we feel it the most through a caring touch, through a friend who's also gone through something similar as Mary did with her. Again, she's one of my examples. She did that for others. She found out people who were going through deepest pain, who were struggling with their faith, and she would talk to them about it and say, I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. I'm sure that even at Yale, I went to her with the question of sexism in the Bible, right? What is this with God and women in the Bible? And I went to her with that. And God is bigger than all of that, right? We know that God is bigger than all of that, and God can heal us of even the deepest physical and most traumatic emotional wounds and bring us joy and new life. And it's not easy. It's not to minimize that at all, but to say that God can do that. And so that is what I learned, I think, from that journey is that, and again, had the privilege of walking that journey with Mary toward the end, is that there's nothing that can keep God down if we allow it.
That's right. Amen to that. Diana, as a younger generation and Chinese American, do you have anything to ask, Katharine?
Katharine, thanks so much for sharing so far. I've just been reading on Mary Li Hsu's life, and it's so beautiful, so touching, and I'm just filled with the spirit hearing about her story. I would say for me, just chiming in, it wasn't until I'm Chinese American, grew up with immigrant parents. I grew up in the South, in Atlanta, Georgia, and it wasn't until I went to Fuller Seminary that I realized, oh, I have an Asian American lens in how I see Jesus. I had just always listened to the majority culture and what they had said about God, and never thought I had a unique lens, had a unique way of relating to and seeing God. So I guess my question is, what stuck out to me about your story is that you said you also didn't really identify with your Asian American until you met Mary. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you meant by that. Is that also your background or your experience?
Yes. I am. Thank you for asking that. I am also a second generation. My parents ended up in Terre Haute, Indiana, where I grew up until I was 18. They were both professors there. Nobody else would hire them. But this progressive economics department in Indiana did. And so that's how I ended up there. And another woman in ministry, I want to mention Barb Nolan, a Methodist minister, but she was not allowed to be in ministry at that point. So she was actually a music minister at First Baptist Church of Terre Haute, Indiana. And I started going to church there. So I became a Christian at 13. It was a more majority culture setting, right? I didn't have any identification with being Chinese, except for my parents, who I was not crazy about them being different. I wanted to be like everybody else. So when I got to college, I had majority culture roommates whom I loved very, very much. We were very close. And then I also started having these other Asian American friends, some Chinese, some Japanese, some Korean, and mostly it was those three at the time. And I got very close to them, but I actually hated myself for it because I thought I was being racist by hanging out with them. I literally thought I was being racist by, kind of emphasizing that. And it took a whole journey during college of going to Asia I first went on a term abroad or a summer program, the Chinese Love Boat, the Taiwanese Love Boat. I went on that for summer. And then from that, I started identifying more with the Chinese in Taipei than with the Californian Chinese. Californian Chinese were more into their hair and stuff like that. And I wasn't really into that stuff. They were kind of rude. They were like, it's too hot, the food's no good. And I'm like, but they're Chinese. Our Chinese hosts were also pure college students, were so polite about it. They never complained. And I said, don't you get kind of frustrated with these spoiled Americans? And they were like, no, we understand that was their upbringing. And so I began to see myself as Chinese too. So I kept going back. So my second term of my junior year, I went to Beijing, and this summer I went to Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong, and then I went to Beijing. And after college, I also went back to Taiwan. And all of that was to piece together my ethnic heritage. But it was that Asian American Bible study that first made it okay for me, with Mary and another friend, Alberta, leading, that first made it okay for me to feel Asian American Christian, that there was such a thing as an Asian American Christian, and that God understood all of my pain. I mean, it was a painful journey. I laugh now, but it was really painful for me, trying to figure out who I was and to blow it apart and put it all back together again, because I really did have no concept of race. And now in my role working with American Baptists, especially American Baptists, across a lot of different cultures, and most recently we have 200 or 300 new Burmese churches that have joined us. So I'm learning again and again and again, each nuance of Asian American culture, and each immigrant journey is a little bit different and very exciting. And yet, as we come here and acculturate, being an Asian American is a blessing, and it's something we have to bring each other and to all the other cultures in America as a gift, and it's God's gift. And so, if we can live that out and serve in that way, it's really wonderful.
Thank you, Katharine. We are very committed to transmitting what is so precious in Asian culture. Russell Moy, co-founder, and Isaac's board chair now, dangled $10,000 in honor of his late mother, Dorothy Chung Moy.
That's beautiful.
She's Korean, but clueless. She never transmitted Korean heritage to him, so I've been journeying with him, letting him know that he came from admiral lineage of Korea and royal lineage.
Excellent.
So now he's boosted. And I think telling our stories and intentionally transmitting good values that come with Asian culture, I lament the loss of that. And so at Isaac, we are deeply committed to really reiterating, and these are some good things. Don't get just whitewash.
Yes, I agree.
So in that context, I don't know who Ron Shu is, for him to donate to Isaac. My heart he moved my heart, and he made me feel like God is giving me mustard seed that can move the mountains. And then to find you, I dropped the mail thank you card because I don't even have his contact info other than physical address, Tacoma, Washington. But to meet you on Facebook stating that you played vital role even till her last phase in her life just meant whole world to me, Katharine.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate everything Isaac has done from the beginning. You and Tim Sang and other founders have done wonderful things with promoting Asian American Christianity and Christian thought. And now you're doing so much for women in ministry, which is a cause, of course, near and dear to my heart, as well as to American Baptists. We are big on Asian American women in ministry.
If I may, American Baptists pioneered with all the amazing leaders. And it is at in San Francisco when we came up with People on the Way book. That's when I met all of you. And I was just shocked.
Yes. So I agree, and you know, Mary, I think it was Mary who chose to give to Isaac, and I worked with her on her list of who she was
Is that right?
and yes, and she cared. Like I say, Asian American Christians, you know, women are at the top, and so I believe that this is her way of speaking to us today. That I happened to wake up early and see your Facebook post this morning. About Mary Li Hsu, and you didn't even know who she was. And I'm like, oh, I know who she is. I know a lot about who she is. And I am so blessed to have known her and to know you, my seminary professor when I was a Fuller. I am a part of the seeds of her fruit, and yours too, because you're my seminary professor. And it is other women and men encouraging women that opens doors for us that we didn't even realize we had closed doors until we see someone doing something like, oh, Asian American women can do that. They can preach, they can teach, they can lead. In some circles, it's more, that door feels more open than in others. But I am really grateful for the work of Isaac, for the work of American Baptists in opening those doors very, very wide and speaking to new generations of women. To know that the message God has to give through you cannot be held down. You are meant to rise up and speak it out, whatever that message is. In different times and places, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 25 years ago, women had, greater put downs. There were many, many put downs that are out there, both subconsciously and externally. Because sometimes it's subconscious, right? That we feel like, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. But we are meant to rise up and break through and speak out through those chains. And so I hated public speaking. I just could not do public speaking. And it's only in the last few years, even though I went to seminary and all of that, being up front a few times there, I was terrified each time. So anybody who's going through that, I can relate to that. I was bundle of nerves. I would stay up all night fretting if I were planning to make an announcement during the announcement time in church. I would have sleepless nights over making announcements in church. That's how big my subconscious chains were about speaking out, much less speaking out and preaching and saying the word of the good news and of justice and evangelism to the world. So if finally after 64 years I'm a little better at that, at least I'm getting more sleep. But I would say to all of you younger women and men to speak out for each other and to say and to recognize and give a helping and encouraging hand to anyone who is struggling, whether it be with illness, whether it be with injustice, whether it be with family, culture conflicts. Right? We all know about first generation, second generation conflict. What we learn to be because of what our parents told us to be, and who God may be calling us to be, may be very different things. And we have a journey to do in following God to breaking out those bonds and telling the story of our parents' culture and generation in new ways that they might not have done, but that we might be able to do, transforming it in the gospel.
Katharine, I see Mary in you, and I'm sure there are many, many Marys that she touched in her life here on earth, and she continues to touch our heart and inspire with her just generosity with abandonment and her sacrifice and her love. And I think those are the qualities that we are committed to transmitting and creating community of hospitality and just a space of belonging for many Asian American women, faith leaders through PastoraLab. And I thank you deeply. And my takeaway today is I am totally overjoyed that she knew about PastoraLab. It is not just her brother, but it was her child.
Although Ron is a great human being, it was Mary herself, yes.
Oh my goodness. I am deeply Mary up in heaven. Rejoice with us. And we're going to credit roll Mary Li Hsu on our podcast. And Katharine, it was just total serendipitous moment on Facebook dialogue.
That was God. That was Mary talking to God, I think.
Yes, totally divine. And I am not far from Alhambra, so when you and your friend come, lunch is on Isaac. So
thank you so much. Can I just close with her quote that she did in her last public broadcast? So some of us Yale alum had raised some money to have an endowment in her honor for that Asian American Cultural Center at Yale. And she was not in great shape, but she got on that Zoom in order to speak to the students and alums and thank them for doing that. And her last words were really to the students at Yale. And they were so merry. And they were, are you doing what you think is important? Is it going to help the world, even if it's just in the little corner in which you live? You honor me by perpetuating this spirit of love and hope for greater justice and equity. So those were her last public words, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, Katharine.
Thank you, Katharine, for sharing that.
God bless. I'm always rooting for Isaac, the PastoraLabs, anything I can do. I'm here. God bless you all, wherever you are.
Thank you for listening to When Women Preach.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the donors and funders who have made this possible. Thank you to all listeners who are tuning in from around the world. We now have more than 6,300 downloads. If you like this episode, please subscribe to our podcast. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and also have a YouTube channel at Isaac Fellowship where you can watch it via video. Please like us on Facebook and Instagram. We want to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening.